What's going on, guys, and welcome to my audio review for the April 26, 2024 edition of Friday Night SmackDown, also night one of the 2024 WWE Draft. I'm Graham Jason Matthews. Hope you guys are doing well and enjoying your weekend so far. Not a lot of massive moves being made on night one of the WWE Draft. I actually personally, definitely in the minority here, was satisfied with a lot of the moves that were or were not made on night one of the draft. As far as a lot of these people had to end up on the same show they've already been on to continue existing feuds, set up future feuds. I mean, there were obviously some roster moves, but not enough for people to really classify this as an eventful draft. I honestly cannot remember the last draft anyway in WWE that people were satisfied with. Usually it's, it was a fucking mess. A lot of these moves don't make sense. This was like the 1 year where they maintained, at least for night one anyway, they maintained a lot of the current rosters. And I had no issue with a lot of these moves because, again, some of these people have to stay where they are to continue current and existing rivalries and set up future feuds for going, for the coming months and heading into SummerSlam and stuff like that. The show itself wasn't overly exciting. What draft show is in WWE? All these draft shows are a majority of them consist of talking. And I even saw someone say, I wish they would go back to the brand versus brand matches. I mean, listen, I grew up on that stuff as well from 08, 09, 2010 and whatnot, battling for brand picks. That shit doesn't even make sense. It never really made sense from a storyline standpoint, because what if Raw wins all of the matches, then SmackDown gets no fucking picks? It makes no sense. The current format I really do not mind. I think the top takeaway from the draft so far, and I'll say this first before we get into the show and who picked who for, Raw and SmackDown and whatever, from those that were eligible on the show, for this show, in night one of the WWE Draft, I will say this. If they did not plan on making a lot of massive roster changes in this draft, this might have been the 1 year where it would have been fine to just do trades instead. But I think I can count on one hand the amount of people that went from Raw to SmackDown and SmackDown to Raw. We got a couple NXT call-ups on the televised portion of the show. We had a few people that were called up from NXT, at least one person, during the WWE.com social media picks that were made after SmackDown on Friday night. But for the most part, a lot of people just stayed where they were. I would rather have too few people make the move to Raw or SmackDown from where they currently are than too many. Because when you swap a lot of people or too many people, then it's just the same rosters we already had, just on the opposite show. I guess it's the same people on the shows regardless, it's just the opposite brand. At that point, what's even the point of doing a draft if you're just taking an entire roster and putting it on a different night? That doesn't really serve much of a purpose. Now, the draft itself this year, like I just said, didn't really serve, so far anyway, much of a purpose, with very few moves being made. A lot of the people just stayed where they were. Now, the draft order, like I said, I'll get into as we get into the picks and stuff like that. That was kind of questionable at certain points, as I mentioned earlier. Then you could have just done trades instead. They don't utilize trades enough. Now that we have actual general managers, they could certainly serve to benefit from doing more trades throughout the year. Now, we get a lot of NXT call-ups throughout the year. We had Tyler Bate get called up before WrestleMania, Bron Breakker, Jade Cargill signed with the show, Naomi came back, all of whom went to SmackDown. Diamond Mine debuted late last year. So, Tama Tonga just debuted. He has nothing to do with the draft, really, but he wasn't an NXT call-up. But they bring people up from NXT routinely. So the draft doesn't even really serve much of a purpose in that way. Now, this show did mark the main roster debuts for Kiana James and Carmelo Hayes. Kiana James was not in the building, but what they did do was similar to last year. Last year, they had an entire room of the NXT superstars, and they would show their reactions that they got drafted. It was similar this year, although it was a lot more people inside the NXT Performance Center. So they were all sitting in the ring with the ropes taken out, on the outside of the ring and in the ring itself. They were all seated there watching the draft, and I don't know if fans were in the building or if it was just more PC people, probably PC people. To my knowledge, I don't know if they let in fans to watch that portion of it at the PC. That would be pretty fucking cool if they did. I don't think so. I think those were people that worked there, sitting in the stands at the PC. And I thought that was well done. They brought back the war rooms, the draft rooms, like the NFL draft does. WWE had done that 5 years ago. They brought those back this year. I didn't really mind it the issue that I had with it the first time was back when they first did it 5 years ago. They had the room celebrating for landing fucking Natalya. And it's like, all right, what are we even doing here? But when you show the War Room disappointed for SmackDown, for example, that they didn't get Bron Breakker, then that makes sense. Like, that I can understand. So, I mean, I wouldn't have done it, period, because they have people in these war rooms. Like, for example, they had the Dudley Boys announce picks, Tori Wilson and Michelle McCool, JBL and Teddy Long, which they've done in years past. They did that last year. It's cool to see familiar faces come out and make the picks and whatnot. But the issue is that those same people are in the war rooms they showed. Why the fuck would Tori Wilson give a shit who ends up on Raw or SmackDown? Why would she even have a hand in making those decisions? That makes absolutely no sense. It really should just be Adam Pearce and Nick Aldis and probably a handful of other unknown faces that are working underneath those GMs to kind of make these picks happen and whatnot, strategizing. The war rooms don't really make sense when you only have one authority figure. Like, if it was other roster members maybe, then perhaps. But it wasn't. It was a bunch of random people that have really no say in... I mean, the GMs literally have no say realistically, but from a storyline standpoint, why the fuck would the Dudley Boys give a shit who ends up on Raw and SmackDown? You know what I'm saying? So, I thought the War Room thing, bringing that back, was a fine touch. They really want to make it more like the NFL Draft. They even have like a little ring, like what is it called? Not a ringtone, but like a little sound that they play before each draft pick or before each round. I like that because the NFL Draft has their own little da-da-da-da-da, like WWE has something similar now, which I don't really mind. I like that as a small little touch. But yeah, like I said, for this year specifically, we'll see what happens on night 2, and I'll talk more about this in its entirety on WrestleRant Radio next week, and in separate posts on WrestleRant.com, breaking down each pick and giving my thoughts on them and stuff like that. But the trades might have made more sense if they're not going to draft too many big names to each show. And again, I'm currently fine with the rosters that we have because a lot of these people staying where they are makes perfect sense to me. Just did not make for the most exciting show. I thought this was a solid show overall. Didn't see that same reaction online. A lot of people did not like this show, and that's perfectly fine. I thought it was perfectly okay for what it was. So here's what we'll do. We'll go through the show itself and the matches and the segments, and then at the end of this review, we'll go through each pick and not spend a ton of time on them because, again, like I said, we will go through each round and kind of analyze these picks on WrestleRant Radio next week, and I'll also give my full in-depth analysis over on WrestleRant.com, like I said, as I do every year, breaking down these draft pools and draft picks and whatnot. But anyway, so for the show itself, it did start not even with the draft picks being made, but a WWE Championship contract signing between Cody Rhodes and AJ Styles for their match at Backlash. Now, this was good. I was looking forward to seeing them hopefully acknowledge they've been in some of the same places. They did. They didn't mention Ring of Honor or New Japan by name, but they did mention that they've crossed a lot of the same paths, but never really crossing paths in WWE, at least one-on-one. Now they have that opportunity to come Backlash with the Undisputed WWE Championship on the line. You know, AJ, of course, bringing up Dusty Rhodes, who we did have history with in TNA. Not every Cody Rhodes feud has to have Dusty Rhodes tied in some form or fashion. The Rollins one did. The Roman one did. I guess Brock did, and Brock had no association with Dusty Rhodes whatsoever. But, you know, you can't rely on Dusty for every single fucking Cody Rhodes feud that he has going forward. But, I mean, for AJ, I guess it did make sense because he was associated with Dusty for a time in TNA. Didn't mention TNA by those initials, but it was implied that was what he was talking about. So I thought this was a good contract signing. Did not predictably end in a brawl, as most contract signings in WWE do, just in wrestling in general, I guess. The verbiage was solid. Nothing overly exciting. I thought it could have been a bit better. Pretty standard stuff for the most part, but I thought they did an effective job of setting the stage for their WWE Championship match at Backlash. The first match on the show, or actually even before we got our first match on the show, Cody Rhodes making the first picks for Raw, or for SmackDown rather, because he was exempt. All the champions in WWE were exempt for this draft, which is a first. Maybe they did that in the first few years. I don't think they did. The champions this year were exempt. So Cody Rhodes, he is technically staying where he is, but really, prior to winning the WWE Championship, he was a Raw guy. So that would have been a nice big draft pick to announce, oh, Cody Rhodes is going from Raw to SmackDown. But it was already implied a week ago that Cody Rhodes was the WWE Champion on SmackDown because the championship is SmackDown property. So that's a big pick that they kind of robbed themselves of with the current rules, but that's just the way that it happens. And we may have seen more shocking picks if they had the United States Champion and the Intercontinental Champion and the Tag Team Champions swapping brands. But people will find a reason to complain about anything because the fact that they did not have those people eligible made more sense. I'm not saying people were saying that the champions have to be eligible, But that's typically where they would make those sort of moves, and when they did do that in years past, aside from maybe the mid-card championships changing hands, a lot of those moves didn't make any fucking sense. Cody Rhodes should be drafted from Raw to SmackDown. Technically, he is swapping shows. He is switching shows. But Damian Priest, I mean, I was maybe considering Judgment Day and Damian Priest taking the World Heavyweight Championship to SmackDown, but they want to keep the World stuff on Raw and the WWE stuff on SmackDown, and that's totally fine. But that was kind of probably the reason why we didn't have a lot of shocking picks, and also some people aren't even eligible. You know, Punk is eligible, even though he's hurt, but Rhea Ripley's not eligible. Charlotte Flair isn't eligible. Roman Reigns, it was announced at the start of the show, pulled himself from the WWE Draft because he won't be back anytime soon. That's what they said. So Roman Reigns was also eligible, and that was what kind of caused Bloodline to move down a couple pegs in the WWE Draft. Not as far down as they should have been. I mean, I'm sorry, not as... I make it sound like they should be lower. They should not have been as low in the pecking order for the draft as they were. That was just stupid. Even without Roman Reigns, they should have been higher than they were. Nia Jax getting selected before the Bloodline, which includes 3 people, Tama Tonga, Solo Sikoa, and Paul Heyman, because Jimmy Uso got booted, Roman's not a part of it. They should have been higher. But I'll get to that later on. But yeah, that's part of the reason why we didn't have a lot of big moves made, because the champions were exempt, people were ineligible, certain people were ineligible, and that's just the way that it works out, and we'll see what happens on night 2. But Cody Rhodes was making the picks with Triple H, which I'll talk about later on. But Carmelo Hayes was one of those picks. So I mention this because this did set up the main event. Before I say Carmelo Hayes and you're like confused why the fuck would Carmelo Hayes be on the show, it's because he was selected by SmackDown in the first round, which was awesome. So that set up a non-title main event between Cody Rhodes and Carmelo Hayes for later on. We'll get back to that in a little bit. So we had the LWO represented by Rey Mysterio and Dragon Lee, taking on Legado's Angel and Berto. A fine match. It felt rushed. It was a nice match while it lasted. I'm sure a lot of people, as myself are, as I am personally, are tired of the whole LWO Legado thing. It's time to move on. You got to get these factions on separate shows. This is a move that has to be made. Get Legado on Raw, or LWO on Raw, but I'm thinking Legado makes more sense to be on Raw, so Legado can do anything that they want with, like, Dominic, for example. They've been teasing that lately. Just get them off the same show. The feud has to end. And it seems like LWO's focus is shifting from Legado to now Carlito, because following this matchup, Carlito was not involved in the match, but he was ringside. Santos comes out with Elektra and says that Elektra's been spending the last couple of weeks tracking down the security footage of what happened on the SmackDown before WrestleMania that saw Dragon Lee get attacked backstage. Sure enough, they aired the camera footage here, the security footage, and it was Carlito attacking Dragon Lee. Now, it's pretty fucking stupid to us. I mean, they showed us the footage, but it was ridiculous that Dragon Lee would not bother to look once. I mean, not initially, like if you get attacked from behind, whatever. But Carlito attacked him a couple different times. Like he threw him into the wall, and he was standing there for a little bit. For Dragon Lee to not even, and he wasn't unconscious, like he was kind of like rolling around a little bit on the ground, whatever. For him to not even look once to see that it was Carlito who attacked him was pretty fucking stupid. And it was even worse, actually, than that. Even worse than that was the fact that after they showed that footage, they zoomed in on Carlito acting, like panicked and whatnot, because he got caught and whatnot. Dragon Lee and Rey, not that they didn't react, they were more stunned than anything, but they didn't even turn to face the guy. Carlito attacked them both from behind. He pushed Dragon Lee into Rey Mysterio before hitting Dragon Lee with a backstabber. He is a backstabber now, literally. But for them to not even, turn towards him, and it was, going on for a good 10, 15 seconds, made them look pretty foolish. But this was an overdue heel turn. This was the way that we expected it to play out as of a couple weeks ago when Dragon Lee did get attacked, because Rey Mysterio picked Dragon Lee over Carlito. And then even over Carlito and Dragon Lee couldn't go, he picked Andrade. So Carlito wasn't happy about that. He's turning heel. Now, he didn't make it known here that he was joining Legado. I mean, I don't know if he would, because him and Santos have had their issues for months. So for him to just turn around and join Legado would be pretty stupid. It is interesting, though, the timing of this, because it sets up, a couple different matches. Him and Dragon Lee, him and Rey Mysterio, if they wanted to go down that route. But will they end up on the same show? And if they don't, do they just blow this off at Backlash by doing Carlito and Dragon Lee on, for example, on SmackDown next week? And then, I don't know if they would rush into that as soon as the next week, but they could. And then doing Carlito and Rey at Backlash. Ending it there, so then Carlito can go to Raw, LWO can stay on SmackDown, or vice versa. Carlito stays on SmackDown, and they go to Raw. I don't think he's going to be eligible with them as part of one pick, specifically. They'll probably be drafted separately, Because, like, the Bloodline were drafted as one pick, but, like, Jimmy Uso, after he got attacked, was not a part of that. I mean, he's currently injured. That's why he wasn't eligible, apparently, like, legitimately injured. He wasn't a part of the Bloodline pick because he's not a part of the Bloodline anymore. Carlito, making it clear he's not a part of LWO anymore. Why would he be drafted with them come Monday's pool? He should probably be drafted separately. But it will be interesting, like I said, to see if they end up on the same show so they can continue the feud for the next little while, or if they just kind of breeze past it, or if they don't even do the feud. They might have one match on SmackDown next week or on Raw or at the Backlash pay-per-view or whatever it might be before moving on entirely. So I guess we'll find out in due time. Bron Breakker was in action against Cedric Alexander. Blinking, you missed it. The match went all of literally like 13 seconds. And if I were Cedric Alexander, I know he was drafted to SmackDown after the show was over alongside Ashanti the Adonis. I would say his tag team partner, but I don't think we've seen him have one single tag team match on television. They teamed together on that Tribute to the Troops show that I was at on SmackDown back in December in Providence, but it wasn't televised. It was a dark match. So they have yet to actually team on television. They've had a couple different vignettes on SmackDown, but they haven't done anything in the ring so far on the show. So I'm kind of surprised they were even drafted as a tag team, considering they haven't even teamed yet. But regardless, Cedric, if I were him, I would not pick up my phone. Cameron Grimes and Zion Quinn both faced Bron Breakker and lost almost immediately. Cameron lasted a little bit longer. Zion Quinn was speared and pinned in the span of like fucking 5 seconds a couple weeks back. Cameron Grimes lasted a little bit longer, but both guys faced Bron Breakker and got fired soon after. Cameron Grimes was let go last week, as was Zion Quinn. So if I were Cedric, I would not be picking up my phone right now. But in all seriousness, though, this was exactly what it needed to be. Bron Breakker is basically their Goldberg right now. Completely dominant, destroying the opponents. He's headed the Raw. Spoiler alert, so we'll talk about that later. But this was a fine, I guess, swan song for him on SmackDown before he reports to Monday nights. We had Bianca interviewed in the stage. I thought this was a nice change of pace. We've seen this before from AEW and WWE as well, where they do the interviews on the stage as opposed to in the ring or in the back. So they had Bianca out there talking about it being made official that come Backlash, and this was Kayla Braxton, I believe, interviewing her. Come Backlash, it's been made official. Bianca and Jade Cargill will team up to challenge the Kabuki Warriors for the WWE Tag Team Champion, or the WWE Women's Tag Team Championships, specifically. Pretty basic, simple stuff here, because the Kabuki Warriors came out to face off with Bianca. Jade Cargill came out to join Bianca in facing off with the Kabuki Warriors. Not a lot of note was said here. Bianca just basically said, I've been facing Damage Control for 2 years now, which is true. She said Kabuki Warriors, but really she's only been feuding with them for a couple of months. Dating back to late last year, she's not been feuding with them for 2 years. That would be Damage Control, but they're a part of that group. Anyway, that was really all that she said, and that Jade would be the perfect opponent, or rather partner, for her to help her in her quest to take down Damage Control and probably take those titles come Backlash. We don't know where Jade is ending up yet, or the Kabuki Warriors. I think the Kabuki Warriors and the entire Damage Control faction could go to Raw. I think they would probably go to Raw together, and then Bianca and Jade could stay on SmackDown. I mean, it would be weird for Jade to go to Raw. I guess they could win the tag titles and be on separate shows. That is possible, but at the same time, it's like, one, Jade Cargill just signed with SmackDown a couple weeks ago. They don't give a shit about that. She's still eligible regardless. I don't know how much that contract was worth from a storyline standpoint, if she's eligible to be drafted anyway soon after. But if you want to set up Bianca and Jade for a future feud against each other, they kind of have to be on the same show. They could trade or something down the road, sure, but I think it just makes more sense for them to be on the same show. So that's what I would do. So that segment kind of bled into the Bloodline stuff, because as they were kind of bickering on the stage, Tama Tonga and Kevin Owens came out. They were brawling from the back to the ring. They were beating up on each other. Solo Sikoa comes out, helps out Tama Tonga against Kevin Owens. They're laying a beating on him. And then out comes Randy Orton, Owens' ally on the road to WrestleMania in their quest for the United States Championship. Both guys fell short, but they remain on good terms. And they were brawling and got the better of the Bloodline, Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga. So I think it was made official. It will be Orton and Owens versus the Bloodline come Backlash. So the tag team title match made official. This match made official. There was another match they made official for Backlash. I forgot what it was, but at least those two matches will be happening for the women's championship match, which I'll get to in a second. But yeah, that's the match that will be made official for Backlash. So I don't know if Jacob Fatu can travel to France. I know he's had some legal stuff and legal issues and whatnot in the past. If he is able to appear in the country, that would be the perfect place to have Jacob Fatu debut, help the Bloodline win, beat up Orton and Owens afterward, whatever. We could very well see him come next weekend. Because the initial report a couple days ago was, oh, he'll probably debut within the next week. And I'm thinking, why have him debut on the fucking draft show? Like when Tama Tonga debuted, it made sense because it was the SmackDown after Mania. They could have had Fatu debut here, but if they're doing a tag team match at the pay-per-view, why would he debut before that? To give the Bloodline the advantage. It makes more sense to make it look like a fair fight before he factors in and helps out the Bloodline and joining them. So that's what I would do. And even Paul Heyman kind of made a comment earlier on in the show when he mentioned that the Bloodline were being drafted so low because, the GMs didn't really know what they were getting with the Bloodline. And that Solo was recruiting new members. He said members, not member. So that would imply there will be more members, and that would include Jacob Fatu. And we'll find out probably come Backlash. So they did that segment. The match made official for Backlash. We had a WWE Women's Championship #1 contenders match that was made official earlier in the show for this show. Nick Aldis told Tiffany Stratton that per your actions, you will actually get a #1 contenders match. That was because of Bayley. Bayley went to Nick Aldis and said, listen, if Naomi can beat Tiffany, then she gets the opportunity she was cheated out of on SmackDown last week by Tiffany. And if Tiffany wins, then I can get my hands on her at Backlash. So it's a win-win. It ended up going to a no contest. The match was fine. It was a good match, a lot like it was 2 weeks ago. Nothing really out of the ordinary about it. They had a solid match. Nia Jax, actually, who was drafted to SmackDown earlier in the night, came out and attacked all the women in ringside. Didn't attack Tiffany, but it was a no contest regardless. She attacked Bayley, she attacked Naomi. So there was no winner, and we found out later on, I thought we might get a fatal four-way, including Nia Jax, although Nia really hasn't done anything to earn that opportunity. They're just setting up Bayley and Nia for down the road. It's going to be Bayley, Tiffany, and Naomi in a triple threat for the championship at Backlash, which I like because Tiffany doesn't have to get pinned, hopefully. Naomi could end up going to Raw. I could see her totally getting drafted to Raw if Jimmy ends up on Raw when he comes back to reunite with Jay or something. So this could be Naomi's swan song. I think Tiffany probably stays on SmackDown. I think she should. Bayley, we know, is staying on SmackDown because she's the champion and the champions are exempt. But I like this. The match itself was whatever, but they set up the match for Backlash. It made sense. And then just like that, we were at the main event. Like I said, the draft picks themselves I'll go over in a second. But the main event was Cody Rhodes taking on Carmelo Hayes in non-title action. Really good match here. That one weird spot that everyone's been gifting and clipping for the last 24 hours of Cody Rhodes and Carmelo, which I missed when I was watching the match the first time. It was a really weird spot because Carmelo went for some move off the springboard, like a springboard move, as did Cody at the exact same time, and they completely missed each other. I don't know if that was the point, because that is realistic where you try to go for a move like that and the person isn't there. Like realistic from a wrestling kayfabe standpoint. We don't see that sort of stuff enough. Maybe they botched it. I'm not sure. Maybe they were supposed to do a double cross body. I don't know, but didn't really exactly work out. But the match beyond that was actually very good. A great spot for Carmelo to be in. Had a chance to shine in defeat. He was never going to beat Cody. He shouldn't have beat Cody, but he was made to look really, really good in defeat. The fact they drafted him so early in the draft, the SmackDown, and he took on the champion in non-title action on the first night, that's a very encouraging sign for his future. Because I said for a while that, not that I'm worried for Carmelo Hayes, but especially compared to like Trick Williams, who has the size and the football background, Carmelo is definitely smaller than Trick. Triple H is, it's a different era now compared to the Vince McMahon era, but still, they tend to typically push bigger guys, and Carmelo doesn't really seem like someone they would push as the top face or heel of a show on Raw or SmackDown, but he should be because the guy's incredibly talented. He has a very bright future ahead of him, and I'm glad they were able to show that here. Cody and Carmelo do go way back. It was actually Carmelo who trained Cody Rhodes for his in-ring return ahead of the Royal Rumble last year. And that's because they knew each other already from the indie scene from when Cody was on the indie scene 7-8 years ago. Cody worked a lot of Northeast wrestling shows that Carmelo Hayes was on, so they know each other very well. Cody's definitely high on Carmelo. He even kind of endorsed him a little bit at the end of the show. Carmelo was a heel, so it's not like, I don't think he raised his hand or whatever, but he did pat him on the stomach when the match was over, hey, good job, and said something to him when the match was over, so it was cool. AJ did not attack Cody as the show went off the air, but they did face off, and that was how we went off the air. So the show itself was not really overly exciting. I can't remember many draft shows that were, because there was just a lot of talking and picks being made. So I don't really know what people expected, because a lot of the time is taken up by the draft picks. Raw will be the exact same thing on fucking Monday night. Now that also begs the question, should they be doing the picks themselves on Raw and SmackDown and not as a separate special on, Peacock or something? that I would understand. I'm fine with them doing it the way that they do on Raw and SmackDown because they think that it leads to a ratings boost or whatever. It was part of the reason why the Slammy Awards back in the day were fucking awful most years, because a lot of it would just be talking. Now, that was even worse because the Slammy Awards meant nothing. The draft picks actually have use, for the most part, until they just ignore the brand split rules and they don't even matter. But, you know, a lot of these sort of talking-esque shows, they kill a lot of time with the talking, and it doesn't make for a very exciting show. And that was the case with this show, too, but I didn't think it was a bad show. I was fine with a majority of the picks. What we got on the actual show was fine, set up a lot of stuff for Backlash. We had 3 new matches announced, and I'm looking forward to it. So I thought it was a fine show. As far as the picks themselves, we'll get into that here. Round 1, SmackDown selected Bianca Belair was the premier pick in the 2024 WWE Draft. Big endorsement of Bianca. She's not even the champion either. They just wanted the Bianca on SmackDown, so she should stay on SmackDown. Love the fact that she was number 1. Number 2, Raw, Jey Uso. So Jey Uso also staying where he is. He's the number 1 contender for the World Heavyweight Championship. So this was my thing. I was fine with them also being number 1 for Raw. Because, you know, ideally, what if he were to kayfabe, you know, theoretically, beat Damian Priest for the World Heavyweight Championship, and he's on SmackDown? That wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So that makes sense why they would, you know, select him so high if he were to beat Damian Priest. But then the same could be said for AJ Styles. Do they have no faith that he's going to beat Cody Rhodes for the Undisputed WWE Championship? These GMs have zero faith, so they didn't even bother drafting him until like the fucking 4th round. That was kind of shitty. Carmelo Hayes, as they mentioned, 1st round for SmackDown, 2nd pick. Big endorsement for him. They mentioned, I think Wade Barrett alluded to on commentary, the first time an NXT pick has ever been made in the 1st round, and that's not true. I think it's happened before, but I know of at least one other instance, and that would be back in the 2016 draft when they brought back the brand split. That was back when they had Finn Balor, who was not the NXT champion at that point. That was shortly after he dropped the championship. He was drafted to Raw in that 1st round as well. So Carmelo is in that same conversation. And then the last pick for Raw in the 1st round was Seth freaking Rollins, staying on Raw as well. Becky Lynch just won the Women's World Championship. Rollins was not going to SmackDown. He's hurt right now. He might not be back anytime soon, but he's going to Raw when he comes back. Round 2, Randy Orton goes to SmackDown. If they want to do Orton and Cody at some point, and they absolutely fucking should. And Orton also just signed to SmackDown late last year. I guess he could have gone to Raw like Bron Breakker did. That was the next pick. That was, I mean, he just signed with SmackDown in February, so I thought it was stupid he went right to Raw, but that one I wasn't really a big fan of. But Orton staying on SmackDown to me made sense. I like Nia Jax going to SmackDown. I feel like that's a good pickup for the Blue brand. She also returned to WWE as part of the Raw brand, but, you know, she's already faced Becky Lynch. She's faced Liv Morgan, who was the next pick. She's staying on Raw. But to pick Liv or Nia, and I like Liv, and Nia has also had a very good run since coming back to the company, and she's improved and whatnot. To pick either of those women, I would say, before fucking AJ Styles or the Bloodline or LA Knight was a tad ridiculous. That was definitely the biggest question mark of this draft. Why they would do that, I have no idea. But Nia Jax, regardless of the order, her being on SmackDown, I like. That was a pick I wanted to be made. She gets away from Rhea, who she already faced, and she'll probably stay on Raw when she comes back. She gets away from Rhea, Becky, Liv, can get away from all those women, can go to SmackDown and start new. So I like that. And Liv Morgan staying on Raw had to happen if they want to have her, hopefully at some point, beat Becky for that belt and feud with Rhea when she comes back. LA Knight, I thought he would go to Raw, and I'm glad he didn't, staying on SmackDown. Not that Knight wouldn't have done well on Raw. That would have been fresh scenery for him. Ever since being called up to the main roster 2 years ago, he's always been on SmackDown. I like him staying on SmackDown for the sole reason that he gets the feud with Logan Paul for the United States Championship at some point. Logan Paul also not going anywhere due to the fact he was a champion. So I like the fact Knight stays where he is on SmackDown. Hopefully we do get that Logan Paul match soon. Ricochet, staying on Raw. This hardly fucking mattered. But again, to pick Ricochet over Sheamus or the Bloodline or AJ Styles is a joke. I mean, Ricochet's a non-fucking factor. Why the fuck did Ricochet have to go in the 3rd round and not the 4th round or whatever? You can televise him, but to put him in the televised or in the 3rd round over the 4th round over some of the other names was a tad questionable. So him staying on Raw, I don't really give a shit about. It's Ricochet. I mean, I like Ricochet, but who even really cares? The Bloodline, again, way lower than they should have been, going to SmackDown, staying on SmackDown. That makes sense. The order of which they went to SmackDown made no sense. You would think they would either get drafted higher or not get drafted at all. I know Roman wasn't a part of it, but they still probably should have gone in the second round. Second round or top of the third round. That was stupid. But they're going to SmackDown, keep the Bloodline stuff going on Friday nights. That makes sense. Sheamus gets Raw. So that's technically not a shocker either because he was already appearing on Raw. But technically, before he came back to the company a couple weeks ago, he was on the SmackDown roster. So I would count that as a roster move. He just came back to Raw, but he was technically on SmackDown previously. So now he's officially on Raw. Again, as he should be, a lot like Knight, he should also challenge for that Intercontinental Championship at some point. Him being drafted away from that belt would have been fucking stupid. So I'm glad he's staying where he is. SmackDown gets AJ Styles, which is great. He's feuding with Cody. That makes sense. I feel like they could have put him on Raw, got him away from the OC, or put the OC on Raw. They're all staying on the same show. That was weird to me. That they're not even associating with each other anymore. But, AJ getting SmackDown made sense. Just more so the fact that why did he go in the top of the fourth and not the third round or the second round? He's the number one contender for the fucking Undisputed WWE Championship. Do they have no faith he's going to be Cody, like I said earlier? That's stupid. Alpha Academy goes to Raw. Chad Gable, Otis, Akira Tozawa, and Maxine Dupree. Again, staying where they are, but they had to because Chad Gable at some point has to win the Intercontinental Championship. They have to keep them on Raw and keep them together for now. Andrade moving from Raw to SmackDown. He just debuted on Raw a couple months ago. He's going to SmackDown. Okay. People saying, oh, he's got to go to the show where Charlotte's on. That would make more sense. Yeah, but they could have put Charlotte when she came back on Raw. I mean, they could have Charlotte debut on Raw when she comes back. Maybe these women's rosters will make more sense once this thing is over, and Charlotte will make more sense to be on SmackDown, which I like, because if Bianca's staying on SmackDown, I still want to see Bianca versus Charlotte at some point. So if that's the case, they want Charlotte on SmackDown when she comes back, hopefully Jade as well, and Bayley. Then Andrade moving to SmackDown makes sense. And if the LWO stays on SmackDown, we could get Andrade and Zelina Vega reuniting at some point. Also, no complaints there. And then going to Raw from NXT, kind of a random pick, Kiana James. So if Lyra Valkyria or Roxanne Perez do end up getting drafted, why anyone would pick Kiana James over those two, I don't know. Or really any of the men's picks or whatever. I'm not sure, but good for her. Listen, she's improved. I really have made it quite clear in my reviews and stuff like that in these videos. I don't give a shit about Kiana James. I really don't think she's improved. I don't think she's that good to warrant a main roster call-up right now. She will not be a game changer, I don't think, in that division, but we'll see how she does. Good for her to get the call-up, though. And then as announced on WWE social media channels after SmackDown was over, they announced a bunch of names going to Raw and SmackDown. Going to SmackDown, the OC, that would include Gallows, Anderson, and Michin. I thought they might go to Raw to get away from AJ, but they're staying on SmackDown. Cedric Alexander and Ashanti the Adonis also going to SmackDown, which made sense because that was where they were airing the vignettes for them, but they haven't debuted yet, so hopefully they debut soon. Baron Corbin, already a main roster star, but he's moving from NXT back to SmackDown. That's where he kind of was last year. He went undrafted, but he was kind of assigned to SmackDown. And Baron Corbin making the move back to the main roster. So Corbin's had a great last year in NXT. I'm excited to see him back on the main roster. There wasn't really a whole lot left for him to do in NXT, and I didn't think him and Bron Breakker, would team on the main roster. Bron Breakker, they clearly have plans for, I would imagine, on his own. So to put them on separate shows to me makes sense, but I like Baron Corbin being drafted to SmackDown. And then the Raw picks. Shayna Baszler and Zoe Stark were drafted separately, even though they're a team. So like Alba Fire and Isla Dawn were drafted together to Raw. That one doesn't really matter. They were already on SmackDown, but maybe this will get them more television time because they've done absolutely shit on SmackDown, so maybe this will help them. I don't know. Baszler and Stark going to Raw separately. I thought they might be drafted separate, or drafted one to Raw and one to SmackDown. I thought they might get separated. They did not. They were staying a team, and they're staying a team on Raw. Okay. And then Ivar as well. Ivar was not drafted with Valhalla, or maybe she's eligible on Monday. I don't know. You would think they would just be together. Eric's not in there because he's hurt. But Ivar is staying on Raw, which is the move that I would make. He's currently appearing in NXT, and they didn't announce anyone being drafted to NXT on this show. They might not be technically drafting people to NXT, but that doesn't mean people like Ivar probably, can't appear on NXT. He probably will continue to pull double duty anyway. So that was the draft in a nutshell. Like I said, I'll make more in-depth analysis, give more in-depth analysis thoughts on it on WrestleRant.com and other articles in the coming days and whatnot. This was a pretty Standard draft, very conservative, I've seen some say, as far as not a lot of moves being made. But I was fine with that because a lot of these people should be staying right where they are. It just makes sense. It just makes sense. So I liked night one. Didn't think it was great. Didn't think it was bad. Thought it was good. I enjoyed it. The order was, again, like I said, Nia Jax and Ricochet going before the Bloodline or AJ Styles was fucking comical. Comical. But the rest of this was fine. We got some NXT call-ups. We'll get some more NXT call-ups on Raw. A lot more people eligible on Monday night. And I'm glad no one went undrafted, too. And I'm surprised they didn't wait until SmackDown Lowdown to announce any of these. I'll watch SmackDown Lowdown soon and review it and put it up here on the channel. But I'm surprised they didn't wait until that, because that's what they've done in years past, where they announced these supplemental picks. I guess they didn't even really want to wait. So no one went undrafted, which is what they typically do. And then they're like free agents. I mean, why anyone would declare free agency is stupid. I guess Roman Reigns technically did. But like last year when Dolph Ziggler went undrafted, which made no fucking sense. And Ziggler was kind of a loser at that point in the company, but still, the draft, some people over Ziggler was questionable. Yeah, so I don't know. I like the fact that we know where everyone's going and no one's going to be floating. At least not yet anyway. Come Monday's Raw, like maybe Omos will end up being a free agent still, which is what he was in the last draft. I wouldn't do the free agent thing. That was kind of a new thing for last year. And a lot of those free agents, guess what? They got fired. Von Wagner, Ali, Dolph Ziggler, Zion Quinn. A lot of those people were free agents and they all got canned. So I would not declare free agency unless I'm Roman Reigns and I know I'm not getting fired in real life. Then that's probably not the best idea. But that was SmackDown for April 26th. April 26th in the book 2024. Thank you guys for checking out my audio review. We'll have more thoughts on night 2 of the WWE Draft on Wrestle Rant Radio next week, breaking down the rosters, all the picks, which brand got the better roster, or if it's fairly even, which is kind of rare, I feel like, with the draft. I feel like one show gets stacked over the other. We'll see how it shakes up coming up on night 2, and if that has any more meaningful moves than night 1 did. Night 1 did not have a lot of major moves, and like I said, I was perfectly okay with that. But if that's the case and you're going to keep a lot of the rosters the same, then doing trades might make more sense. Like trading Bron Breakker for Andrade might have made more sense than just announcing the same people staying right where they are, at least in my opinion. But thank you guys for checking out the review. I appreciate it. Be sure to like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. Have an awesome one, folks. I'm Graham G. Matthews, and I'll catch your ass down the road.